Hello and welcome back to our second grade YouTube channel. Today we are going to be reading chapter 8 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle. And this chapter is called Family Reunion. All right, so just with all of my other YouTube videos, let's start out with some interesting words that I found in the chapter when I read it beforehand. The first word is called pilfering. And what that means is to steal something. It's a verb. It means you show action with verbs. So to steal something, you have to perform an action in order to do that. The next word is foolhardy. And that is an adjective which we use to describe nouns. And foolhardy means someone who is usually careless or very bold and reckless. So foolhardy is a word that is used to describe Ralph. He isn't always the most careful mouse. The next word is sulky. And that is an adjective. And you may hear, some people say that person is sulking right now. And what that means is when somebody is in a bad mood, or when somebody is just like refusing to be cheerful. Like no matter what you say, you can't do anything. They are just sitting there and they're pouting and they're upset and they're not going to smile. That is sulky, and that is an adjective. The next word is ashamed. And that is also an adjective used to describe nouns. And if you are feeling ashamed, and I'm sure we've all felt this way at one point or another, I have, is when you're just like embarrassed about something that you did. You feel sort of like guilty. You feel bad about it. One time I was very embarrassed because I was very ashamed of myself because I accidentally, when I was a little kid, I stole my brother's bike when I wasn't supposed to ride it, and then I crashed it. And I kind of messed up a couple of things on it. So when I did that, I felt very ashamed of myself because now I ruined his bike. And the last word is allowance. I used to get an allowance when I was a kid if I did my chores. And I had a lot of chores, like the dishes and the garbage, and I had to clean my room and all of those things that I'm sure that you have to do as well. And an allowance is a noun, and it is like an amount of money that you might be given for doing something. Okay, so this poster over here we're going to talk about at the end of the chapter, and that is also in your work packet. I tried to kind of make a similar poster that you also have in your work packet for chapter 8, and that is comparing and contrasting Keith and Ralph's character traits. Okay, let's go ahead and start reading chapter 8. The next thing Ralph knew, his mother was shaking him by the shoulder. "Wake up," she said, "Ralph, wake up! Room service has brought us another meal." Room service? Ralph rubbed his eyes, not believing what he had heard. Room service has brought our dinner? Yes, a real feast, a whole blueberry muffin and a chocolate chip cookie, said Ralph's mother. "Get up, we are having a family reunion." It all came back to Ralph. "Oh, room service," he said, understanding at last. "You mean the boy, Keith. He is room service to me." Ralph's mother sounded happy and carefree. Ralph sat up already. His aunts and uncles and many squeaky cousins were arriving by the secret paths in the space between the walls. It was a long time since anyone had enough food for a family reunion, and there was rejoicing in the mouse nest for everyone but Ralph. Maybe you can think in your own head about why Ralph might not be rejoicing like his family right now. He was thinking of the motorcycle he had lost and the promise he had broken. He had a dull, heavy feeling in the pit of his stomach, and he did not feel like celebrating. "Why, there's Ralph," squeaked his Aunt Sissy, who thought she was better than the rest of the family because she lived and the bridal suite, where she led her relatives to believe riches of rice fell to the carpet when the bride took off her hat and the groom shook out his coat. The rest of the family knew Aunt Sissy was not as grand as she pretended to be, because very few brides and grooms came to the hotel these days. My, how you've grown! Ralph never knew what to say when people told him how he had grown. Well, well, if it isn't Ralph, said Uncle Lester, who had a nest inside the wall of the housekeeper's office where the maids dropped donut crumbs every morning at 10 o'clock when they had their coffee. What's this I hear about you riding up and down the halls on a motorcycle? Uncle Lester had a way of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. My land, a motorcycle, said Aunt Dorothy. Isn't that pretty dangerous? Wouldn't mind riding one myself if I were a few years younger, said Uncle Lester. All the little cousins came crowding around Ralph. Show us the motorcycle, they squeaked. We want to ride it. Come on, give us a ride on your motorcycle, Ralph. Huh? Ralph? Come on, Ralph, please. Ralph knew he was expected to be polite to all of his relatives, even the squeaky little cousins. Well, embarrassed and ashamed, our word, he looked down at the floor. I sort of lost the motorcycle in a pile of sheets and pillowcases. Lost the motorcycle? Oh, Ralph, cried his mother, genuinely alarmed. Ralph knew what she was thinking. Did this mean the end of room service? Did she have to go back to pilfering crumbs for his brothers and sisters? Another one of our words. That's a young mouse for you, said tactless Uncle Lester. Can't take care of anything. If anybody asks me, I think it's a good thing he lost it, said Aunt Dorothy. Riding a motorcycle is just plain foolhardy. All the little cousins looked disappointed and sulky, so they were looking very sad. I don't think he ever had a motorcycle, said one of them. I bet he just made it up, said another, and the rest agreed. So his cousins went from thinking he was really cool for having a motorcycle to feeling very disappointed to actually at the end not even believing that he even had one in the first place. Ralph felt terrible. The family reunion swirled on around him. The muffin and the cookie were divided. Cousins fought over the blueberries. Uncles, usually overweight uncles, asked for second helpings. Everyone talked at once. The little cousins finished their dinner and went racing around the mouse nest. The aunts and uncles raised their voices to be heard over the rackets their children made. Suddenly there came from the knothole a noise that drowned out the squeaks and squeals of young mice at play. Shh! Not a mouse moved. They looked at one another, too terrified to speak. Psst! Hey, Ralph, come on out, whispered Keith at the entrance to the mouse nest. Ralph's mother gave him a little shove, but no one spoke. With heavy feet, Ralph walked to the knothole, but he did not go out into room 215. What do you want? He asked. You and your family better be quiet in there, or my mom will hear you. You know how she is about mice, Keith said. I don't know why people say things are as quiet as mice. You sound like a pretty noisy bunch to me. Behind Ralph, his relatives began to tiptoe quietly away to their own homes, leaving his mother to do all of the cleaning up. Did you have a nice picnic? Ralph asked, dreading what he must tell the boy. Yes, we saw an old mining town with a real jail with bars on the windows. Keith reached into his pocket and pulled out something curved and hard and white with a rubber band fastened to it, with a piece of Scotch tape. "I brought you a present," he said. "Come on out." Puzzled and curious, Ralph squeezed through the knothole. "What is it?" he asked. Whatever the object was, he had never seen anything like it. "Half a ping-pong ball I found down in the game room," said Keith. "See, I padded the inside with thistle down and anchored the rubber band to the top with Scotch tape." "What for?" Ralph still did not understand. "A crash helmet for you." Keith set the half ping-pong ball on Ralph's head and slipped the rubber band carefully around his whiskers until it rested under his chin. "There, that's just right. You need it big so there will be plenty of room for your ears. When you ride a motorcycle, you need a crash helmet." Ralph peered at Keith from under his new crash helmet, which rested lightly on his head. He knew he looked every inch a motorcycle racer, but never in his whole life had he felt so ashamed. He longed to crawl off into the hole and never face Keith again. But his conscience, which until now he did not know he had, would not let him. There was nothing to do but stand there in his fine new crash helmet and confess. "You might as well know," he told Keith. "I lost the motorcycle." "Lost the motorcycle?" Keith, who had been kneeling, sat back on his heels. "But how?" "I rode it by mistake into a pillowcase and a heap of linen on the floor, and it got dumped into the laundry hamper," confessed Ralph. "You rode it into the pillowcase?" repeated Keith. "But you weren't supposed to ride it in the daytime. You promised." "I know," agreed Ralph miserably. "I didn't exactly mean to write it." "Well, you see, the maid was vacuuming under the bed and I began Ralph and stopped. Oh, what's the use? I wrote it and I lost it and it's probably gone to the laundry by now and I'm sorry." The boy and the mouse were silent. Both were thinking about the little motorcycle with its clean lines and pair of shiny chromium exhaust pipes. "That motorcycle was my very most favorite of all my cars," said Keith. "I saved my allowance and I bought it myself." So Keith is talking about how he had an allowance and he saved all of his money so that he could buy his motorcycle. Ralph hung his head in his crash helmet. There was nothing more he could say. It was a terrible thing he had done. "I guess I should have known you weren't old enough to be trusted with a motorcycle," said Keith. The boy could not have said anything that would hurt Ralph more. And that is the end of chapter 8. So in your work packet, you have questions that you're going to be answering for each chapter. So let's just go over a couple of those questions right now. So one of the questions that you have is, where was the family reunion located? And where was that located? That was located in the mouse nest. What kind of meal did the room service bring? Room service brought, remember, a chocolate chip cookie and a blueberry muffin. How did the little cousins feel about the motorcycle at first? So like we saw, at first, they thought it was really cool and they were very impressed at first and they all wanted to ride it. But then at the end, they were very disappointed in Ralph and they actually didn't believe him. And you can answer the rest of them on your own. And then the next page is where you're going to be comparing and contrasting Keith and Ralph. So when we compare and contrast something, that means that we are talking about what they have in common and what their differences are and what they Yes, so basically what they have in common and what their differences are. So in the middle right here where it says both, that is what they both have in common. And then where it says Keith and Ralph, those are the differences, okay? So we see that Keith, some character traits that I felt that Keith has is that he seems mature. He seems smart, like he has common sense. He also seems more responsible than Ralph. And he's very generous. He's not a selfish person. He shares his motorcycle with Ralph. He also shares food with Ralph and his family. So he's very generous. And these are some characteristics and character traits that I felt that Ralph had. And Ralph is reckless. He is dangerous. He doesn't listen. Especially when people are trying to give him advice, he doesn't really listen. He does whatever he wants, doesn't he? That's another one we could add, is that he's a little stubborn. He is selfish. He doesn't want to share his motorcycle with anyone. He wants it all for himself. And he's a risk taker. We know he goes in places that are not safe for mice to be going in, and he really takes a lot of risks. And these are some things that I thought that both Ralph and Keith had in common. They both love motorcycles. They both love to play with toys. Their moms worry about them a lot. And they both don't always tell the truth, because we know that they both kind of have lied to their moms. So that is something that they have in common, unfortunately. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 8, and I will be seeing you guys again soon. Please make sure you're following along in the book as we are reading so that you could be learning new words, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye!